200 Comanche warriors don't just appear on the ridge above your barn by accident. They don't ride that quiet, that tight, that patient, unless they've come with a purpose that's older than your fences and heavier than your name. Elias Mercer stood in the shadow of his own doorframe with the taste of iron in his mouth. The late light bled across the prairie in long orange bands, turning every blade of grass into a thin flame. Down below, his cattle shifted and lowed as if they could smell something coming that men pretended not to. They were there, on the rise where the mesquite thinned and the land opened like a palm. A line of horsemen, motionless, their silhouettes cut sharp against the sky. Feathers and lances, and the faint glint of metal at the ends of long guns. Their mounts stamped the earth in short, restless beats. Elias didn't move. Neither did the men behind him. His hired hand, Otis, stood a step back, shotgun held low but ready, knuckles pale. The boy they'd taken in 3 days ago, starved, half-feral, no older than 10, was nowhere in sight. Elias had put him in the root cellar when the first scout had been seen at dawn. Not as a prisoner. As protection. As if a door of dirt and potatoes could hold back what was written in the wind. Beside Elias, Nora's hand found his forearm and gripped it hard enough to hurt. Her fingers trembled. She didn't look at the ridge. She looked at the yard, at the wash line, at the chipped water bucket, at anything that felt like yesterday. The Comanche didn't raise a shout. They didn't send a messenger. They waited, the way a storm waits, letting the sky do the talking. Elias felt the dry heat press against his skin. Somewhere, a barn swallow cut through the air and vanished. He swallowed, throat tight, and the sound he made seemed too loud for the world. Then, faintly, like a thread pulled tight across distance, he heard a voice. Not from the ridge. From inside his house. A woman's voice, low and urgent, muffled by walls. Nora's voice. I couldn't tell him, she was saying. Elias's eyes shifted, just a fraction, to the open doorway behind them. The inside was dark, cool. The sound came again, broken, as if through cloth. I tried, but every time I looked at his face, Elias's stomach hollowed. Nora's hand was still on his arm. She wasn't speaking now. Her lips were pressed together, jaw clenched. Her eyes were fixed on the yard, as if the ground might open and take her. But that voice, her voice, was still there. Elias turned his head slowly, like a man afraid of what he'd see. The telephone sat on the small table in the front room. A new thing in this part of Texas, a line strung from town to the scattered ranches like a spider's thread. Elias had paid too much for it, telling himself it was for cattle prices and emergencies. The receiver was off the hook, and the line was still open. Nora had forgotten to end the call. Her voice came again, clearer now, in the hush between the cattle's lowing and the horses' distant stamping. I heard them say they'd come for blood, she whispered into the mouthpiece. I heard them, Elias. I was right there. I heard it, and I didn't stop it. Elias's heart gave a hard, slow thud that seemed to shake his ribs. Out on the ridge, 200 men waited. Inside his own home, his wife's words hung in the air like smoke. But let's go back to where it all started. It began with dust and hunger and a boy who didn't belong to anyone's ledger. 3 days earlier, the sun had climbed white and merciless over the prairie, flattening the world into heat and shimmer. Elias had been mending a section of fence near the creek bed, if you could call a dried-up scar in the earth a creek, when Otis came riding hard from the south. Otis was a good hand when he wasn't talking too much. He'd been born on the wrong side of the Red River and raised half wild, but he knew cattle and he knew this land. When he pulled up, his horse lathered, eyes rolling. Elias knew something was wrong. Got something down there, Otis said, breathless. He pointed with his chin toward the mesquite line. Ain't a calf. Ain't a coyote neither. Elias wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. The air tasted like sun-baked clay. What is it? Otis hesitated. Looks human. Elias didn't say anything for a moment. Out here, the land held stories the way old men held grudges. A human could mean a traveler, or a thief, or a dead man left for the buzzards. It could mean trouble that brought company. He set his hammer down and followed Otis on foot, boots crunching through brittle grass, the world quiet except for the far-off creak of windmill blades and the faint rattle of cicadas. They found the boy in the shade of a low mesquite, curled like a wounded animal. His hair was black and tangled with burrs. His shirt, if you could call it that, was a strip of cloth tied around his shoulders. His ribs showed like ladder rungs. One ankle was wrapped in a dirty strip of hide, stained dark with old blood. When Elias knelt, the boy's eyes snapped open. Too big, too bright. A dark, hard shine that didn't match the rest of him. He tried to scramble back, but his body betrayed him. He made a sound that wasn't a word, throat raw. Otis lifted both hands. "Easy now," he murmured, as if talking to a spooked colt. Elias didn't reach for the boy. He simply sat back on his heels and let the boy see his face. Sunburned, lined, a man in his 30s but older around the eyes. A man who'd buried a child once and hadn't learned how to breathe the same since. The boy's gaze flicked over Elias's belt, his knife, the rifle slung across his back. Then his eyes went to the canteen at Elias's side. Elias unhooked it slowly and set it on the ground between them. He nudged it forward with 2 fingers and waited. The boy stared like it might bite him. Then he lunged, grabbed it with both hands, and drank like he was trying to pour life back into himself. Water spilled down his chin and onto the dry soil, darkening it for a heartbeat before the earth swallowed it. When he finished, he coughed, eyes tearing. He looked at Elias again, wary, and then, like he couldn't help himself, he whispered something in a language Elias didn't know. "Comanche," Otis mouthed silently, eyes wide. Elias felt the word land in his chest like a stone. A Comanche child this far from the main trails meant a dozen things, none of them simple. It could mean he'd been lost, stolen, escaped, or sent ahead like a spark before a fire. Otis shifted his weight. "We ought to leave him," he said quietly, as if the boy couldn't understand tone. "Or take him to town. Sheriff will know what to do." Elias looked at the boy's ankle. The skin around it was swollen, angry. Flies hovered, kept at bay by the boy's weak swats. The boy's fingers trembled around the canteen. Elias rose slowly. He didn't look at Otis when he spoke. "Get the wagon." Otis's mouth tightened. "Elias, get the wagon." Otis hesitated, then spat in the dirt and turned away, muttering under his breath about fools and graves. Elias crouched again. He took off his hat and set it on the ground. The boy watched him like a hawk watches a snake. Elias held out his hands, palms up, empty. The boy didn't move. Elias didn't force it. He simply waited until the boy's breathing slowed, until the tightness in his shoulders eased a fraction. Then, with care, Elias slipped an arm behind the boy's back and another beneath his knees. The boy flinched, but he didn't fight. His body was light as kindling. As Elias lifted him, he felt the boy's heart beating fast against his chest. And in the distance, so faint Elias might have imagined it, the wind carried a sound like drumming. Not loud, not near, just enough to remind the land what it remembered. By the time they reached the ranch house, Nora was on the porch, apron dusted with flour, her dark hair pulled back tight. She'd seen the wagon come in, had seen the shape in Elias's arms. Her face went still. Not fear exactly. Something more complicated, like recognition mixed with dread. "What have you done?" she asked, voice low so it wouldn't carry. Elias didn't answer right away. He stepped into the shade of the porch, the boy limp now, exhaustion pulling him under. Nora's eyes dropped to the boy's ankle, then to the faint pattern of paint, smudged, almost gone, on the boy's cheek. "Comanche markings." Nora swallowed. Her hand went to her throat, as if she could hold her breath in place. "We can't," she whispered. "Elias, we can't." Elias looked at her, and for a moment the sun and the dust and the years fell away, and all he saw was the woman who'd once stood beside a small grave with her fingers locked into his, refusing to let go even when the earth closed. "He's a child," Elias said. Nora's eyes glistened, but she didn't blink. "And we are not blind," she said softly. "You know what they'll say in town. You know what they'll do if they find out." Elias stepped past her and carried the boy inside. He didn't see the way Nora's shoulders sagged when the door shut. He didn't see her glance toward the telephone on the wall. New, gleaming, a promise and a threat all at once. He didn't see her wipe her hands on her apron and, with shaking fingers, lift the receiver. And he didn't hear her whisper into the line, to someone in town whose name Elias would have recognized if he'd been paying attention. "He brought one home," she said, voice breaking. "A Comanche boy. Elias brought him home." Outside, the prairie stayed quiet. But the kind of quiet that comes before men start riding. And 3 days later, 200 Comanche warriors waited on the ridge above Elias Mercer's barn, and his wife's forgotten call carried a heartbreaking confession into the room like a ghost that had finally decided to speak. Elias didn't sleep the first night. He sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low, listening to the house settle and creak like it was remembering old winters. The boy lay on a pallet near the hearth, wrapped in a quilt Nora had once stitched for a child who didn't live long enough to wear it thin. Every so often the boy's foot would twitch, and he'd make a sound through his teeth, half a whimper, half a warning. Nora moved quietly, too. She didn't speak much after they cleaned the wound. She boiled water until it smelled metallic, mixed salt and whatever her old midwife's instincts told her, and washed away the grime. The ankle was swollen and hot, the skin split in two places as if the boy had run until his body tore. Nora's hands were steady, but Elias saw how her fingers shook when she thought no one was looking. When she tied the last strip of clean cloth, the boy's eyes opened. He stared at Nora the way a starving dog stares at the person holding food, wanting, afraid, ready to bolt. Nora held a spoon of broth to his lips. The boy didn't take it at first. Elias leaned forward, elbows on the table, and kept his voice low. "It ain't poison," he said. He didn't know if the boy understood the words, but tone traveled farther than language. The boy's gaze slid to Elias, then to Nora, then down to the spoon. He sipped, a slow, careful draw, like he expected the world to punish him for accepting kindness. Nora didn't smile. She just waited, patient as a woman who'd learned that forcing anything, love, grief, trust, only made it tear. When the boy had taken enough to keep from fainting, she set the bowl down and let him lie back. Only then did she look at Elias. The lamplight cut soft shadows along her cheekbones, making her look older than she was. "What's his name?" she asked. Elias watched the boy's mouth move faintly, as if he was speaking to someone in a dream. "I don't know." Nora's throat tightened. "You didn't ask?" "I asked," Elias said. He didn't answer. Or he did, and it weren't in words I know. A long pause settled between them, thick as the steam that rose from the pot on the stove. Nora's eyes flicked to the telephone on the wall. The receiver sat in its cradle like a sleeping animal. New in their home, purchased with cash that could have gone to seed or to new shingles. Elias had wanted it because the world was changing. Rail lines, town gossip, prices that jumped and fell like jackrabbits. He'd said he wouldn't be caught out on the prairie with no way to call for help. Nora said nothing about it. She didn't have to. Her silence made it louder. "Town will hear," she said finally. Elias's gaze didn't move. "Town always hears. Not like this." Elias ran his thumb along the edge of his coffee cup. The ceramic was chipped, the way everything in a working life got chipped, and still you used it because you didn't have time to replace it. "He was dying in the dirt," he said. "I couldn't ride past." Nora's shoulders sagged as if the truth of that sentence cost her strength. "And if they come looking for him?" Elias didn't answer right away. Outside, coyotes yipped somewhere far off, their voices thin in the wide dark. Elias pictured torchlight on the horizon, men riding with ropes and rifles, hatred dressed up as righteousness. "We'll cross that when it comes," he said. Nora's mouth pressed into a line. She turned away to rinse the pot, and her hands shook so badly the metal clanged against the basin. That was the first consequence, quiet and private, before any neighbor even caught wind of it. The second consequence arrived with hooves and dust. The next morning, the sky was a hard blue, clean and pitiless. Otis was out by the corral, pretending not to look toward the house, pretending not to wonder what kind of trouble his boss had hauled home. Elias stepped onto the porch with a tin cup of water and a piece of bread. He'd barely set foot on the top step when the boy appeared in the doorway behind him, barefoot, hair wild, eyes fixed on the open land like he expected it to swallow him. Nora hovered in the shadows, arms folded tight across her chest. She looked like she'd slept in her clothes. The boy stopped at the threshold, not crossing it. His gaze tracked the horizon, then flicked to the barn, then to the distant cottonwoods by the dry creek bed. Elias held out the bread. The boy stared. His jaw worked like he was chewing words before letting them out. Then he stepped forward, one step only, and snatched the bread from Elias's hand with quick fingers. He backed up again, chewing fast, eyes never leaving Elias. "Easy," Elias murmured. The boy swallowed, then spoke. It was a short sound, clipped, almost harsh. Otis, across the yard, paused with a saddle in his hands. He squinted. "What did he say?" Elias shook his head. Don't know. Nora stepped out onto the porch. The boy turned his head toward her, and Elias saw something shift in his expression. Not warmth, not trust, but a flicker of recognition. Like he understood her fear because it matched his own. Nora swallowed. Her eyes dropped to the boy's ankle, still wrapped, still swollen. You can't keep him out here, she said softly. Not where anyone can see. Elias didn't have time to answer. A rider appeared on the far road, a thin line of movement in the heat shimmer. Elias knew the horse's gait, knew the rider by the way he sat his saddle, straight-backed, as if the whole world owed him room. Deputy Harlan Pruitt. Otis saw him too and let out a low curse. Nora's face drained of color. Her hand went to the porch rail like she needed something solid to hold her upright. Elias kept his voice calm. Inside, he said to the boy. The boy didn't move at first. His eyes narrowed, tracking the rider. Then he slipped back through the doorway without a sound, vanishing into the cool dark of the house. Deputy Pruitt rode up slow, dust rising around his boots. He tipped his hat at Elias like a man greeting someone at a picnic, not a man stepping into the edge of trouble. Mornin', Mercer, he drawled. Elias nodded once. Pruitt. Pruitt's eyes flicked past Elias, lingering on Nora. Ma'am. Nora forced a small nod. Deputy. Pruitt dismounted with the ease of someone who spent more time in a saddle than in a bed. His hand rested near his gun belt, not threatening, just present. Heard you found something out by the mesquite line, Pruitt said. Elias didn't ask who had told him. He didn't need to. Out here, a whisper traveled faster than a wagon. Found a boy, Elias said. Pruitt's eyebrows lifted, a show of mild surprise. Boy, huh? Elias watched him carefully. That what you came for? Pruitt smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sheriff just wants to keep peace. Folks get nervous when strangers start tinning up, especially with certain rumors. Nora's fingers tightened on the porch rail. Her knuckles went white. Elias kept his face still. What rumors? Pruitt's gaze held Elias's for a long moment. The wind moved through the grass, making it whisper. That he ain't exactly a stranger, Pruitt said quietly. That he's Comanche. The word landed like a shot. Elias felt Nora's breath hitch behind him. Otis shifted at the corral, hands slipping toward the shotgun leaned against the post. Elias didn't flinch. He's a child, he said again, the same sentence as last night, as if repetition could make it a shield. Pruitt shrugged. Child or not, folks remember what happened at Green Hollow. Folks remember raided wagons, scalped men, burned houses. They don't see a hungry child. They see a sign. A sign of what? Pruitt's mouth twitched. That trouble sniffing around. Elias leaned one shoulder against the porch post, casual on purpose. You want to see him? Pruitt's eyes narrowed slightly. That'd make it easier. Nora's voice cut in, sharp for the first time. He's sick, she said. Fever. Ankle near rotted. He's barely standing. Sheriff wants to drag him back to town in this heat. Pruitt's gaze slid to her. He studied her, the way men sometimes studied women when they weren't used to being challenged. I didn't say drag, he replied. I said see. Confirm. If he's Comanche, there's protocols. Protocols, Nora echoed, and the word sounded like it tasted bitter. Pruitt scratched his jaw. Army's got an agent up in Fort Belknap. Maybe they take him. Maybe they send word to a chief. Or maybe. He let the sentence hang, a door left open. Elias heard the unspoken end. Or maybe folks in town take matters into their own hands before anyone official can stop them. Elias's voice stayed level. Sheriff can come himself if he wants. Bring a wagon and water. I'll not have a fevered child hauled out like a sack of grain. Pruitt's eyes hardened a fraction. You making yourself the law now, Mercer? Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I'm making myself a man who doesn't leave children in the dirt. For a heartbeat, the yard went still. Even Otis stopped moving. Even the wind seemed to pause. Pruitt's stare held, then shifted, past Elias, past Nora, to the doorway where the boy had disappeared, as if he could see through walls. Finally, Pruitt exhaled through his nose and gave a slow nod. All right, he said. You keep him inside. You keep him out of sight. And you don't go pretending this is just you doing charity. Folks don't see it that way. Elias didn't answer. Pruitt swung back up into the saddle. Before he turned his horse, he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so only Elias and Nora could hear. Mercer, he said, and there was less swagger in it now. If that boy's got kin out there, they'll be looking. And when they come, they won't come like Pruitt. They'll come like thunder. Then he rode off, dust trailing behind him like a warning. Nora's breath came out shaky. She pressed her palm to her mouth as if she might be sick. Elias watched the road until Pruitt was a speck against the horizon. Behind him, the screen door creaked. The boy stood there, clutching the edge of the frame with thin fingers. His eyes were locked on Elias, and something had changed in them. Less fear, more urgency. He spoke again, faster this time, the words tumbling out like stones. Elias shook his head helplessly. I don't understand. The boy's jaw clenched. He pointed to himself, then made a gesture toward the south, 2 fingers walking across the air, then cut his hand sharply sideways, like a blade. Nora stepped forward, voice trembling. He's saying. She stopped, swallowed hard. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the boy's face. Elias turned to her. What? Nora's lips parted, and for a moment she looked like she was about to confess something she'd been holding inside since before the boy ever appeared. He's saying they're coming, she whispered. Not for him. For what happened? Elias stared at her, not understanding. What happened where? Nora's gaze flicked to the telephone again, the black receiver hanging quiet and innocent on the wall. And in that moment, Elias felt the first real crack open beneath his feet. Not fear of Comanche riders, not fear of town men with ropes, but fear of the thing he didn't know about his own wife. Because Nora wasn't just afraid of what the world would do. She was afraid of what she had already done. The first sign wasn't the riders. It was the smoke. Elias noticed it just after sundown, a thin gray finger rising where the horizon dipped and the land folded into distance. It wasn't campfire smoke, too steady for that. It rose straight, patient, as if whoever lit it knew time was on their side. He stood at the fence line longer than he should have, hat pulled low, watching the sky darken from blue to bruised purple. The cattle were restless again, tails swishing, hooves shifting in the dust. Animals always knew before men admitted it. Behind him, the house glowed faintly with lamplight. Nora hadn't spoken much since morning. She moved through the rooms like a ghost that still had chores to finish, folding, wiping, straightening things that didn't need it. The boy stayed close to her now, quieter than before, eyes tracking every sound. He'd said his name at last, tapping his chest once and whispering it like a secret. Tomesu. Elias practiced it silently until it felt right in his mouth. Otis came up behind Elias, boots crunching soft. He followed Elias's gaze and stiffened. That ain't good. No, Elias said. Otis shifted his weight. You want me to ride to town? Elias considered it. Town meant men. Men meant opinions. Opinions turned into decisions once fear got involved. Not yet. Otis frowned. They won't wait. I know. A wind stirred, carrying with it something else now. Faint, rhythmic. Too slow for hooves. Too deliberate for chance. Otis's jaw tightened. You hear that? Elias nodded. I hear it. Drums. Not loud. Not close. But real. They came on the wind like a heartbeat you only noticed when it started racing. Elias turned toward the house. Bring the horses in, he said. Quiet-like. And keep your gun down unless I tell you otherwise. Otis hesitated. Elias. That's not a request. Otis gave a short nod and moved. Elias walked back to the porch, every step heavy. Nora was there already, standing just inside the doorway. She didn't ask. She could see it in his face. They're out there, she said. Yes. How many? Elias didn't lie. Enough. Nora closed her eyes briefly, like she was bracing for pain. When she opened them, they were clear. Then it's tonight. The drums grew more distinct as darkness settled, not louder exactly, but closer. The sound wrapped around the land, bouncing off hills and disappearing into low places, making it impossible to tell direction. Elias barred the door more out of habit than hope. He didn't blow out the lamps. He didn't want the house to look afraid. Tomesu sat on the floor near the hearth, knees pulled to his chest. He'd stopped limping as much, adrenaline doing what rest couldn't. His eyes were fixed on Elias. Elias crouched in front of him. He spoke slowly, using his hands as much as words. People are coming, he said. They're not here to hurt you. Tomesu's eyes flicked to the window, then back to Elias. He shook his head once. Elias hesitated. Then, quietly, they're here for me. Tomesu studied him for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched Elias's sleeve, just the fabric, not skin, and said something Elias didn't understand. But he understood the gesture. Outside, a horse snorted. Another answered. Otis slipped in through the back, breath shallow. They're on the south ridge, he whispered. And the east. I counted at least 30. Could be more Hanjin back. Elias nodded. Put the rifle by the door. Then sit. Otis stared. Sit. I said sit. Reluctantly, Otis obeyed, lowering himself onto a chair like a man waiting for a sentence to be read. The first rider appeared out of the dark without sound, just a shape detaching itself from shadow. Then another. Then 10 more. They moved like the land had decided to stand up. They stopped 100 yards out, horses aligned, silent. No war cries. No threats. Just waiting. Elias stepped onto the porch. Nora caught his arm. Her grip was firm this time. Don't. Elias looked back at her. If I don't, they'll come to the door. She searched his face, then nodded once and let go. Elias walked down the steps and into the yard, stopping well short of the riders. He kept his hands visible, empty. The night air pressed close, carrying the smell of horse sweat and dust, and something older, earthier. A man rode forward alone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, hair bound with leather. His face was painted simply, lines that caught the moonlight and turned his eyes into dark wells. He dismounted with slow care and stood, hands resting loose at his sides. He spoke, his voice low and even. Elias didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. This wasn't rage. This was accusation. Elias swallowed and answered in English, steady. My name is Elias Mercer. This is my land. The man listened, head tilted slightly, like he was weighing the sounds rather than the meaning. Then he spoke again, shorter this time, and gestured toward the house. Elias felt the weight of it settle on him. He glanced back. Nora stood framed in lamplight. Temesa's face was just visible behind her skirt, pale in the glow. Elias turned back. The boy is safe, he said. He was hurt. I helped him. The man's jaw tightened. He said a word sharply. Behind him, one of the riders shifted, hand moving on a lance. Then Temesa stepped onto the porch. Nora gasped. No. But Temesa moved past her, limping down the steps until he stood beside Elias. He didn't touch him. He stood straight, chin lifted, and spoke. His voice was stronger now. Clear. The man's eyes widened. Murmurs rippled through the riders like wind through grass. The man took a step closer, searching Temesa's face. He said Temesa's name, soft but fierce. Temesa nodded once. The man's shoulders sagged, not with relief, but with grief. He spoke again, longer now. His words flowed like a story Elias would never fully hear. Temesa listened, then answered. His hands moved as he spoke, small but precise. He pointed at Elias, then at the ground, then made the cutting gesture again, slower this time. The man's gaze snapped back to Elias. His eyes hardened. He spoke one word in English, thickly accented. Blood. Elias felt Nora step up behind him. Her voice trembled, but it carried. It wasn't him. The man turned toward her, surprised. Nora stepped fully into the yard, hands clasped tight in front of her. The lamplight painted her pale. She swallowed hard, then spoke louder, to all of them. It was a call, she said. A mistake. I spoke to someone in town. I was afraid. I didn't know what they'd do. Elias turned, stunned. Nora. She didn't look at him. I heard them talking. Men. About a Comanche scout they'd killed by the river. They were laughing. I told someone. I thought. Her voice broke. She steadied it. I thought warning them might stop more killing. The man stared at her, not understanding the words, but understanding the confession. Temesa translated, halting but clear enough. When he finished, the night felt heavier. The man closed his eyes. When he opened them, the fire in them was banked, not gone. He spoke quietly. Temesa translated again, voice shaking. My uncle was the scout, Temesa said. He went to see if the land was safe. He did not come back. Elias felt the ground tilt beneath him. The man stepped closer, stopping an arm's length away. He looked at Elias, not as an enemy now, but as a measure. You keep the boy alive, he said slowly, choosing each word. You tell the truth. Now you must choose. Elias met his gaze. Choose what? The man gestured to the darkness behind him, then to the house. Give him to us, he said, or stand with him. The drum stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it rang. Elias felt Nora's hand slide into his, her grip fierce. He felt Temesa's small shoulder brush his leg. Behind him, Otis shifted in his chair, breath held. 30 riders waited in the dark, and Elias Mercer stood in the dirt between two worlds, knowing whatever he chose would be carried far beyond this night, long after the drums began again. The night stretched, unblinking. No one moved. Not the riders, not Elias, not even the horses, as if the land itself was holding its breath to see what kind of man stood in the yard. Elias felt the weight of every eye on him, but it was the smallest presence that anchored him, the warm, fragile pressure of Tamesu's shoulder against his leg. The boy didn't look afraid now. He looked resolved, in the way only someone who had already lost too much could be. Elias cleared his throat. The sound felt loud, disrespectful to the silence. "He stays," Elias said. The words didn't come out strong or defiant. They came out plain, final. Nora's fingers tightened around his hand, her breath catching. Otis exhaled behind them, long and shaky. The Comanche leader didn't react right away. He studied Elias's face, searching for something beyond courage, perhaps for foolishness, perhaps for truth. His gaze flicked to Nora, then to Tamesu. Tamesu lifted his chin and spoke again, quietly, firmly. The man listened. His jaw worked, muscles shifting beneath weathered skin. When Tamesu finished, the man answered, his voice lower now, softer. He reached out and placed 2 fingers against Tamesu's forehead, then against his own chest. "Family." A murmur rippled through the riders, not anger this time, but something heavier, sorrow mixed with pride. The man turned back to Elias. "You know what it means," he said. "If soldiers come, if townmen come, we will not forget where the boy stands." Elias nodded. "I wouldn't ask you to." Another long silence followed. Then the man did something Elias hadn't expected. He unfastened the small bundle tied behind his saddle and held it out. Inside was a folded cloth, worn thin with age. He opened it just enough for Elias to see. A tintype photograph. It showed a young Comanche man standing stiffly beside a woman and 2 children. The edges were bent. One corner was cracked. "My brother," the man said. "Tamesu's father. Killed 2 winters past." Tamesu's breath hitched. He hadn't seen the picture before. His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. He reached out, touching the image with reverent care, as if afraid it might vanish. Elias felt something break open in his chest, not loudly, not cleanly, just enough to let understanding in. The man refolded the cloth and tied it back to his saddle. "You keep him alive," he repeated. "You teach him your words, but you do not take his past from him." "I won't," Elias said. The man studied him one last time, then stepped back. He raised one arm, palm open. The riders responded instantly, fluid and silent. Horses shifted, lances lowered, not threatening, but ceremonial. The man spoke, his voice carrying now, not sharp, not loud. Tamesu translated as best he could, the words trembling through him. "He says," Tamesu whispered, "that tonight is not for blood, that anyone who breaks this peace will answer to him." The riders turned as one, like a tide pulled by the moon. Hooves pressed into dirt without hurry. One by one, they faded back into shadow, into land that swallowed them whole. The last sound was not a drum. It was the wind. When the yard was empty again, Elias realized his knees were shaking. He sat heavily on the porch step, suddenly aware of how tired he was. How old? Nora sank beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Tamesu stood between them, small hands clenched at his sides. Nora reached out, slow and careful, and touched Tamesu's hair. He flinched at first, then leaned into it, just slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Not to Elias, not even to the boy alone, to the night, to the past, to every mistake that had rippled outward from fear. Tamesu didn't answer with words. He took her hand and pressed it flat against his chest so she could feel his heart. It was strong, steady. Something in Nora's face gave way. She pulled him into her arms and held him like she'd been holding breath for years. Elias watched them, his vision blurring. He didn't wipe his eyes. They went inside together. Otis lingered on the porch, staring out at the dark where the riders had been, shaking his head slowly. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. "World ain't done surprising me yet." Sleep came hard that night, but it came. In the days that followed, the ranch changed in small, almost invisible ways. Tamesu learned English the way dry ground learned rain, slowly at first, then all at once. He learned the names of tools, of animals, of the way Elias liked his coffee, and the way Nora hummed when she kneaded dough. Nora learned Comanche words in return. Not many, just enough. Words for water, for home, for sorrow. Town men did come, eventually. Two of them, stiff-backed and polite in the way men got when they weren't sure who had the upper hand. They asked questions. Elias answered truthfully. Nora stood beside him and didn't flinch. When they left without threats. Rumors still traveled, but they softened as they went. Stories changed shape. Fear dulled into curiosity. One afternoon, weeks later, Elias found Nora sitting at the kitchen table with the telephone receiver in her hand. The line was dead, disconnected on purpose now. She held it loosely, staring at nothing. "I shouldn't have used it that day," she said quietly. Elias set down the crate he was carrying and crossed the room. He rested his hands on the table, leaning close. "Fear makes fools of all of us," he said. "What matters is what we do after." She nodded, tears slipping free at last. "I thought I was protecting us." "You did," Elias said. "Just not the way you expected." Outside, Tomasa laughed, a sudden, bright sound, as Otis tried and failed to teach him how to whistle through a blade of grass. That sound carried farther than any drum. And for the first time in a long while, Elias Mercer believed the land might remember this night not for blood or fire, but for the quiet moment when people chose to stand together, even when the world expected them not to. The dawn that followed came soft and pink, washing the prairie clean. But the story wasn't over yet. Years later, the prairie remembered in its own way. Grass grew back where hooves had pressed deep. Fence posts rotted and were replaced. Seasons turned the land from gold to green to ash and back again, as they always had. But there were things that did not fade, no matter how much time tried to wear them down. Tomasa grew. Not quickly, not neatly. He grew the way trees near dry creek beds grew, bent by wind, scarred by hunger, but rooted deep. By 14, he was taller than Nora, his shoulders already broadening, his hands steady and capable. He spoke English without searching for words now, though when he was tired or angry, Comanche slipped back in like a truer tongue. Elias never corrected him. On quiet evenings, Tomasa would sit on the porch step with Elias, watching the sky bruise into dusk. Sometimes they spoke. Often they didn't. Elias learned that silence could be a language too, one that didn't demand answers. Nora changed as well. The tightness left her first, then the fear. She laughed more easily, slept more soundly. The telephone stayed on the wall, but it gathered dust. When the line went dead for good after a storm took down the poles, she didn't ask Elias to fix it. Some things didn't need fixing. Town never fully forgot what had happened, but memory softened with distance. The men who had laughed by the river drifted away. One killed in a bar fight, another married off and pulled into someone else's life. No one ever spoke openly about the scout again, but Elias noticed fewer rifles carried into town, fewer hard eyes tracking Tomasa when they came in for supplies. And sometimes, just sometimes, Elias would see a lone rider on a distant ridge. Watching, not threatening, just there. One autumn morning, when the air smelled like cold and apples and endings, Tomasa came to Elias before dawn. He stood in the doorway, already dressed, a small bundle tied at his back. Elias knew before he asked. "It's time," Tomasa said. His English was careful, respectful, but his eyes were steady. Nora appeared behind Elias, her breath catching when she saw the bundle. She crossed the room without speaking and took Tomasa's face in her hands, thumbs brushing his cheeks like she had when he was small. "You don't have to," she said, though they all knew it wasn't true. Tomasa smiled, just a little. "I do." They rode together to the South Ridge, Elias, Nora, Otis, and Tomasa, where the land opened wide and honest. The wind carried the smell of cedar smoke before they saw anyone. This time, there were no drums, only horses, and men, and one familiar figure waiting apart from the others. The Comanche leader had aged too. Lines cut deeper into his face. Gray threaded his hair, but his eyes were the same. He dismounted when Tomasa approached. They spoke quietly, father and son in all but blood. The man placed his hands on Tomasa's shoulders, inspecting him like a craftsman inspecting his work. Then he turned to Elias. "You kept your word," he said. Elias nodded. "So did you." The man inclined his head. Respect given, respect returned. Nora stepped forward. She hesitated only a moment before reaching into her pocket. She drew out the tintype photograph, the the one Temesa's father had carried, the one the leader had left with them after that first night. I kept it safe, she said, but it was never mine. The man took it gently, his breath shuddering once as he looked at it. Then he surprised her. He pressed it back into Temesu's hands. He knows who he is, the man said. Now he knows where he has been. Temesu swallowed hard and nodded. They didn't linger. Goodbyes weren't loud things in this land. Temesu embraced Nora, long and tight. She didn't cry. Not then. He clasped Elias's forearm, man to man. I will come back, Temesu said. Elias believed him. As they rode away, Nora watched until the figures blurred into the land, until the prairie took him back the way it had once tried to take his life. The ranch felt quieter after that. Not empty, just wider. Years passed. Elias's hair went gray. His hands stiffened. Otis left to start a place of his own, not far, close enough to still show up unannounced with stories and complaints. Nora planted a small garden near the porch, insisting color mattered even when no one was watching. And one spring morning, a familiar horse stood at the fence. Temesu returned with a woman beside him and a child asleep against her chest. He brought words from both worlds, warnings, hopes, small pieces of peace stitched together carefully. He spoke for men who could not speak to each other without him. He stayed. Not always, but often enough. The land learned his footsteps again. When Elias finally died, it was quiet. In his sleep, Nora held his hand until it cooled, her face calm with grief that had already learned how to breathe. They buried him on the rise behind the house, where he could see the plains stretch forever. At the grave, Temesu spoke in Comanche first, then in English. He chose us, he said simply, when it was dangerous, when it cost him. Let that be remembered. Nora stood straight, her hand resting on Temesu's shoulder. She felt the past settle, not heavy now, but solid. As dusk fell, a single drum sounded in the distance. Once, then silence. The wind moved through the grass, carrying stories forward. And the prairie, vast and patient, kept them all.